do this. And Facebook has a 10-second delay, which is really weird.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. And thanks for joining us this evening for the next in our live interviews from Cornwall Film Festival. We're going to give people a few minutes to find us if they're watching live, and we're just going to check that the stream is working. So do let us know where you're watching from, and do give us a like and a comment, please. And if you haven't already, or maybe you're new, why not head over to the CFF Facebook page, like and turn on notifications so you can see about all of our upcoming events and videos. Well, I'll assume you've all done that. Anyway, welcome everyone. I'm Henry from Cornwall Film Festival, and thank you for joining us today, whether it be live or recorded. Before we start, I do have to say something. For those who don't know, that Cornwall Film Festival is an independent charity and film festival based in Cornwall, UK. And each year we hold a short film competition which welcomes entries from across the globe. Now, this year, with all that's been going on, and especially for students who didn't get a chance to make their final year film, we have introduced a new category to this competition called the Student Treatments, for you to highlight the most important information about your film, including title, logline, story summary, and character descriptions. This needs to be no longer than one page of A4, just to paint a picture of the film you wanted to make. The closing date for this is July 31st, 2020. So if you're watching the recording, you might have missed that. For the full information, please head over to our Film Freeway page. Okay, that's done. Back to tonight. Please don't forget that you can put your questions in the comments for this interview. And thank you to Sally, who is checking on those this evening. And if you don't have a question, why not tag someone who you think might be interested or is missing out. The more people who like and comment, the more people get to see the video. Okay, thank you for bearing with me there, Tim. This evening, I am joined for our first international interview, Tim Palmer, a director of photography who has worked on such shows as Cold Feet, Wire in the Blood, Ashes to Ashes, Being Human, Line of Duty, Vera, Shetland, Doctor Who, Killing Eve, Strike Back, and The Last Kingdom. Please give a big like for Tim Palmer. Hello, Tim. Right, let's get rid of that. Okay. So I've got to put less credits for people, I think. It just seems to take so long to go through. We've done so much stuff. It's amazing.
Well, that's the life of a television director of photography. There's a lot going on, so you tend to work on a lot of projects.
Well, that's great. I mean, there's such a huge variety as well. So on that idea that you're working on so much, how did it all start? How did you become a director of photography?
Well, it's been a long journey. I was at university in the early mid-80s doing history. It's very academic. Had no idea about any of the visual arts whatsoever. But I remember I picked up a camera in my last term. A friend of mine had a camera, and I started taking some pictures, and then she showed me how to develop them. And once I went along for the ride, so to speak, and once I'd been in the darkroom once and seen the magic of film, I was just hooked and realized that I could frame a photograph well, and I really enjoyed the result. And that enjoyment of photography, it sort of coincided with an appreciation of films and classic movies and independent films, any kind of movies, and I became a real film buff. And at that point, I realized that somehow I had to combine that love of photography with that love of film. And the light bulb moment came when I realized that there were these people called cinematographers who were out there, and they were the ones that essentially created the images. And sort of in my early 20s, I thought, that's what I've got to do. I sort of threw away all the academia and launched headlong into the film world as a trainee, dog's body, nobody, sweeping floors, making tea, doing anything I could to try and get onto a film set. And eventually that led to a camera trainee position on a feature film in a proper camera crew, and that led to becoming a clapper loader and then a focus puller, and I was on the way up, so to speak. And after a few years in working in the camera department, I got a place on the cinematography course at the National Film School in Beaconsfield, and that absolutely crystallized my ambition and understanding of how I was going to eventually become a cinematographer. And I was fortunate enough on graduating to start getting little bits and pieces of work, and shortly afterwards that was followed by a pilot for a new TV series, very short 30-minute pilot, which got commissioned as a series, and that was it. I was on my way.
And here you are now.
Here I am now.
I've got to say, your favorite military advisor is watching.
Paul. Hi, Paul.
A nice comment there with a smiley face. So you can have
well, we had a lot of fun on Strike Back.
I'm sure he'll ask you some questions as well later. So obviously that's your start of your journey, taking you obviously missing out bits to now. But for those who are watching who don't know what a director of photography or a cinematographer is, could you explain in your own words?
Yes, essentially, that's the person that's in control of the image, putting that image onto the screen. So there are essentially only the two ways to do that, and that's with lighting and camera work. So you have to frame the shot up and you have to light the shot. And back in the days when I started and we were shooting on film, you had to know how to expose the film correctly so that you would have a properly exposed shot that would project onto the screen and look normal to the general viewing public. So it's the image. You're in charge of creating the image, and as the responsibilities is to be quite specific, and certainly in the UK, there's a lot of directors of photography that operate the camera and do the lighting. And there's many directors of photography who only do the lighting and they employ a camera operator to operate the camera. In other countries, union regulations, and like in the United States, you're not allowed to do that. You have to have separate camera operators. But that's another story. But even if, as a cinematographer, director of photography, even if you're not operating the camera physically, having your hand on the camera, you're in control of the image. So you're liaising very closely with the camera operator and making sure that the composition and the camera movement is the right way of delivering that picture for the story. And then then you do the lighting and light it too. So it's a kind of double-pronged responsibility.
It does sound like there's quite a lot to it, really. We just think of someone pointing a camera and going for it, really. But
yes, and obviously it's more than just doing just lighting and operating. You're hired as a cinematographer because the director will respect you for being able to interpret the emotional nuances of the script and the performances into a visual image that is appropriate for that style of script or acting. So you have to go beyond just the technicality of delivering the picture. You have to make sure that picture absolutely suits the script.
No, that makes sense. And we're going to look at some of your work where, of course, you have created those pictures and imagery in a moment. But before we do, a lot of people will see directors of photography, obviously, in the credits, both pre and post credits. And there are three little letters after a lot of the names, BSC. Could you stick after your name as well? Could you again explain what that is to some people?
Well, it's a real honor to be a BSc, and it stands for British Society of Cinematographers. And it's essentially, how should I say, it's an elite group of cinematographers that have been chosen by a small retinue of their senior peers who consider you sort of worthy enough and of a high enough standard in your craft to represent Britain and the society as a member of its cinematographic society worldwide. And it's a I mean, it's not a knighthood or an OBE or anything like that, but it's a kind of an accolade that really makes you bona fide. If you're a BSc, then you're definitely, people know that you know exactly what you're doing, and you've been around the track many times, and you're utterly dependable, reliable, and hopefully good at your job.
No, that makes perfect sense. It's just that case of it's quite a nice thing to have as well. And congratulations, obviously, of having it. But so, Tim, linking into that, we're going to quickly talk about some of your pioneering work,
Well,
I would say.
I don't know about that.
On the road to Coronation Street. I don't know if many people remember who are watching have ever seen it or remember it, but correct me if I'm wrong, but it was one of the first television show.
Well, the first and really the only proper long form TV drama that was shot on the Canon 5D Mark II. It was an amazing project to work on. Charles Sturridge, the director, who started off at Granada doing Brideshead Revisited, and he worked on Coronation Street as a young director. But it was when I met him for the job, we just talked, we hit it off immediately, and I knew that it was a very low budget, but it had to have a really powerful look to it. And it was a very brief window in 2010, before the Alexa had come on stream. It had just become available, but there were very few in the country and far too expensive to rent one for this job. There was, it was sort of tail end of Digibeta for drama, and there was the Pro 35 system on Digibeta cameras, which was the closest to a kind of 35mm look. But I'd bought myself a Mark II a few months previously, and I'd been experimenting with it, and I did some sort of fashion films with a fashion photographer, and I kind of followed her around filming what she was doing, and I was using the 5D in sort of manual mode, and results were absolutely spectacular. It had a kind of quality to the moving image that I'd never seen before, especially with that depth of field and the big sensor and the light, the sort of luminosity of it. And I knew a small rental house that had adapted the 5Ds to work on dramatic production. So I was talking to Charles Sturridge about, well, why don't we give this a go? And he was all for it, because it was apart from the pictures looking good, it was such a tiny camera that we'd be able to swing it around and get it into lots of tight spaces, and we wouldn't need expensive dollies and cranes, etc. And so there we were. The big stumbling block was the BBC, and they would not allow us to film on the 5D because it was not on their approved list of HD capable cameras, and we had hit an absolute brick wall with that, to the point where the first day of filming we had to film on the Digibeta with a Pro 35 and super speed lenses, and do it that way. But on day two, Charles and I, we were so fed up with this gigantic camera that it worked against everything that we discussed in pre-production of how to make this show look the way it should look, that we just ditched it and went out on a wire and pulled out the 5D and started filming the rest. We filmed the rest of the day's material on the 5D without telling anybody. And then the next day, the note came back from the executives at the BBC saying, well, we love these rushes, it's amazing. What did you do? How did you make it look like this? I've never seen anything like this. So when we said, well, we had to fess up and say, well, this is what we did. And the word came from up high, well, just keep doing what you did. Don't listen to any of the technical bods in the engineering department, just shoot it like that. So that's what, so there is one day's worth of material that is Digibeta, but the rest of it is on the 5D.
Well, I think it's a nice massive change for the industry,
Yeah,
Really
but you know, if we'd filmed, if that
Asking
job had come 3 or 4 months later, we would have shot it on the Alexa. And
Yeah.
if it had come 3 or 4 months early, we would have shot it all on Digibeta. So it was just like this little tiny sliver of a window of opportunity, and thankfully we were able to take advantage of it.
Well, you're making history there, Tim, I think is what we call that, making history. But onto history, you've worked on many historical dramas and programs, as well as contemporary pieces. You've got quite a few, what I'd say, detective, crime, or thriller credits.
Yeah,
Probably the most notable recently is Killing Eve,
right. Yeah,
which is obviously on the BBC. We had some, as people are commenting, saying that they loved that. But
well,
it's quite well known for its stylistic look, I'd say, in parts of it.
yes. Well, I worked on series 1,
Yeah.
which was I'm very proud of. I think it's sort of some of my finest work, I have to say. Not just not me as such. It's just I was very, very lucky to be given the opportunity to work on a show which had such creative ambition, and a brilliant director, John East, who really ran with the story and the ideas and the visuals, and the executive producers who just wanted it to look amazing at, you know, I wouldn't say at any cost, but if you had a good idea to make it look good, they'd let you do it as long as it looked good.
Well, do you have any examples of those things that you did to make it look good? Was there anything particular that you had to do?
Yeah, well, I used it was a lens. The director John, who I worked with a few years before on a medical drama called Critical, it was for Sky. And it was a lens that I sort of brought onto that show. It was a periscope snorkel lens. So it's kind of a long, sort of very long lens that it has a quite a totally unique perspective. You can get very close, very wide, and the focus holds from, you know, the hairs on the side of your face to infinity. And you can create a point of view with that lens that is really, it's so graphic and so visually striking. And it works in an incredibly visceral way to get into the heads of the characters. And I pushed production to, it's a very expensive piece of glass, but I pushed them to let us keep this lens for the duration of filming, and which initially they were reluctant to do because of the cost, but once they'd seen what we could do with it, they loved it. And if you know, I could go through that series, and every day we were using it, from the opening, a lot of the, you know, the scenes where the disco, where you can get the lens panning across the stylus of a record being played and go through to some nefarious piece of action in the background, but which would be impossible to achieve in a conventional way. So I would say that was a way of creating a very striking visual signature to the episodes that we really pushed hard for and delivered.
So everyone who's watching, then it's you know, it's very important that you can find that right kit, I think, if you're going to be a DOP, and convincing them that you do need it. But onto something slightly different then, Tim. Strike Back.
Yes.
Very much a high octane, action packed drama.
Yeah.
And we had Paul, of course, the military advisor, on last week. I don't know if he's still watching. If you are watching, Paul, say hello again. But that's going to give you a lot of different challenges, I imagine, to what something like Killing Eve will have given you. Well,
Strike Back is well, it's non-stop. It's non-stop action, you know, filming furiously all day long. The key to making that show work well visually is you essentially, I mean, as a director of photography on Strike Back, you're kind of a manager, as close as I could see, because there's multiple cameras, huge setups. You're thinking ahead to something you're going to be doing tomorrow, and big sets to light. So you just have to stay. If you can stay over everything, you're on top of everything. You've got a good crew working ahead of you, working with behind you, brilliant camera operator Steve Murray, you know, Paul Biddis, battle consultant that you can rely on to provide convincing action. Then my responsibility to get Strike Back done is just to make sure that everything and everybody is in the right place to cover the action, and then it all works absolutely fine. If you're not planned and prepared, you can't make it up as you go along. Whereas, for example, on something like Killing Eve, where it's very much about responding to the emotional beat of the moment within a scene, which can change, and you can adjust accordingly to that and react in a way that might be totally different to what you had planned. On Strike Back, you really have to be very well planned, and you have to shoot what you've planned. And it's an enormous fun, and it's very rewarding, and it's hugely entertaining to work on. And it's amazing to get through a day and know that you've shot sort of 3 firefights, major explosion, and a couple of car crashes, and you wonder how you did it. But actually you did it because you're surrounded by a team of extremely professional, knowledgeable people who know what they're doing, and you've been able to muster them together to deliver that work.
I think that's one thing that's coming across a lot of these interviews, is that the team is hugely important, and working with everyone in your team and everyone else. Oh, Paul is listening. He's in the gym. He's there. But so from Strike Back, which is obviously contemporary action, you also did a block on The Last Kingdom.
Well, I did two blocks. I started it. I did the opening episodes of the recent series, and then I did a couple of episodes in the middle as well.
Well, apologies, but they two blocks on The Last Kingdom, which is obviously Netflix's big hit at the moment, and that's again a very different show to Killing Eve or Strike Back. Did you have any particular challenges that you had to face for that one, either logistically or technically?
Well, yes, it's a big ensemble piece. So there's many scenes with a lot of actors in each scene, and there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of action, but there's also a lot of dialogue, and extensive coverage is needed to make sure the scenes have the energy and the pace they need, and you're not missing any dialogue or key moments or key lines. So it's a 2-camera shoot, sometimes 3, mainly handheld. And the challenge, the big challenge I found on The Last Kingdom was just to make sure that you were able to set up light the locations and shoot them in a way that would enable the directors to get the coverage they needed. So, 35, 40 setups a day from time to time, sometimes more, sometimes less. And actors who are wearing, heavy, cumbersome costumes in the heat of the summer, so it's not comfortable for them. So they want to get through the scenes quickly. So I found with The Last Kingdom, it was hugely enjoyable and lovely lighting. I was really pleased with everything we did, but there's no time on that show to be too particular or finesse things too much. You just broad strokes of a paintbrush and hope you get it right the first time, and then just let it all happen after that and shoot just to make sure you've got the coverage. And then I actually found the big battle scenes that we did surprisingly straightforward to film. They were the least complicated things to do. Maybe I'm saying that from my point of view. I'm sure other departments would argue the opposite. But again, with the right planning, knowing where the cameras and lights were going to go, they shot themselves very quickly. And it's like many things. It's when you have 8 or 9 people in a small room all talking to each other, that's the hardest thing to shoot. And to make sure that you get the right coverage, you get the right eye lines, you're not missing anything. It's complex.
No, definitely. So it's quite interesting. Different challenges again for you. And I'm sure we're going to have some questions about that. And we've whizzed through that now, Tim. And so actually coming towards people's questions. So if you do have questions, do send them in. And
I have to just say, I find actually, I don't know, I find the lighting is actually the sort of easy part of it. It's the shooting of it and making sure you get the right shots is the hardest part, because you're working for the you're really working for the director there, and you're there backing up keeping their back for them and making sure that they're not being compromised at all. And it means, as a director of photography, I could easily say, well, no, we can't do this because the light's wrong, and I can't get my backlight over there, so you can't do that shot. And many directors would say, oh, okay, I understand, so we won't do that. But I would never dream of putting a director in that position, and I'll always shoot whatever the director wants, and I will make it work. But that's always the challenge.
Definitely. Well, that leads quite nicely into our first question, actually, Tim. Is that, do you have a guiding rule of thumb when you first get to set up a scene?
Yes, I'm there in the room watching the rehearsal, watching the director block the action with the actors, and I'll look at how it's unfolding, and invariably, always the way it should naturally shoot will present itself to me and the director, and we'll have a quick conversation about it and get on with it. But I don't like to sort of plan the way a scene will shoot without seeing what the actors will bring to it. I mean, I'm often asked, well, can you go with the director to that next location and work out what your angles are going to be? And I'll say, sure, I can do that. But whatever we decide, it's all going to change once we rehearse it with the actors. So
yeah, you can't really prepare for people, can you? I suppose
no.
They're going to do different things.
And you have to respond to the body language and what they want to bring to the scene.
And that's actually quite nice one. Then all these questions lead on quite nicely. It's great. Do you, as a DOP, have a lot of responsibility in pre-production?
Yes, if I do, and in sort of varying degrees. If it's a big series and I'm the lead director of photography, if I'm kicking it off, or if I'm doing a single drama where it's a one-off movie of the week or series, then you're really in charge. You need a lot more time, but you're setting up the look of a show, and there's sort of extensive camera and lighting tests to do, and visual signatures and styles to create with the director. Often when you come in the middle of a series and you're in the middle of a block or a middle block in a series, that look has sort of been established up to a point, but a lot of the big financial decisions based on the creation of the show will have been made already, so you have to kind of fold into those, and you might have a little bit of leeway for a few special scenes of your own, but ultimately you have slightly less responsibility.
Oh, that's good. I think it's really interesting, because as I said earlier, a lot of people who are watching are going to be quite new to the industry or new to being a DOP. So it's quite nice to hear the different levels. And on that note, do you have any advice for anyone who's thinking of becoming a directing of photographer? Any books they should look at? Any way of developing their eye for working in that way?
Well, watch lots of films. I mean, there's so much. There's a wonderful book, which was actually the book that I found the most really inspired me and taught me, enlightened me as to what the job was. It's called Masters of Light, Schaefer and Salvato. It's the two authors, and it's interviews with all the 9 or 10 of the great cinematographers from the 60s and 70s. Gordon Willis, Haskell Wexler, Mario Tosi, and they talk about how they lit their films. And I found, reading that book, I'd seen the films before, but having seen the films, then read the book, then seen the films again, I knew that I immediately understood what actually went into lighting and shooting the scene, rather than just enjoying the scene for what it is. But you have to, I always tell people, you have to learn to see. It's not just looking at things. You need to see what's going on around you and look at the way understand the way light changes in a room when you're sitting in a room and the sun's moving around, what it's doing. I mean, I'm spending this interview, I know I'm concentrating on, but I'm also looking at the way the light is changing on my face because the sun is moving around these windows. And I'm subconsciously, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's a side light, but that's sort of become a bit of a backline. I need a bit more fill on, and maybe I could do this. So it's sort of by osmosis. Your brain has to be constantly thinking about light, always.
I have to start doing Zoom consultations for people on lighting. Just sort of phone in quickly and go, no, you need some more light there, more light there.
Well, I can see I need a little net off the top of my head here.
People can just practice with Zoom. Just get yourself set up on Zoom, people. Get some lights and just play around with how it works. I've got much darker suddenly. There's a door over there that was lighting me, and then the light that I actually got pointing at me was run out of battery.
Well, that's same thing. I'm looking at you, Henry, and I see you got a warm sort of top light, and then you got a bluer light on the front of your face, fill light, and it's a nice color mix. So I'm thinking, right, the next time I'm in a little, doing a little sort of maybe a DJ set, I might light it just like that.
Well, I'm happy to assist in that. I look out for that in your next show. Ooh, we got a long question here from Scarlett. Okay, Scarlett, let me have a read of this. There's a specific shot used where when characters are faced with unfortunate truths, e.g., in the final. This might be a spoiler if you haven't watched Killing Eve. Spoiler. In the final scene, when Caroline's daughter tells her that she feels guilty about Kenny, it's a high side angle close up. This is very specific with extreme shallow depth of field, and I'm guessing a lens baby.
Okay.
Could you talk more about this rare and interesting shot?
I don't think that was one of the episodes that I filmed, but just describe it again. It was a high angle close up.
So it's a high angled extreme close up with shallow depth of field.
So the camera sort of up here looking down. Well, that's, yes. Okay. So, and what's the question then? So that's the,
could you talk, I suppose it's about, could you talk more about your idea for this rare and interesting shot used throughout the series?
Oh, okay. Maybe, I mean, I did a shot like that on Kenny when he was at work in series 1. But I can't profess to be the specific owner of that particular shot, but the way it's described, I know what you mean. And I always find that, when you have a high angle looking down on someone, it feels very much like it's a very strong point of view shot, because the camera is the lens is, it's used because you feel like the lens is kind of boring into someone's brain. It's getting into their head. And it's a good way to create a sense of, even though you're completely off it sounds counterintuitive because you're not in the eye line looking in the eyes, but what you're doing is you're metaphorically looking into their brain. And so therefore you're looking into their thoughts and the way they're thinking, and that's the object of that type of shot.
There we go. So we're trying to look inside someone's head, which is quite a good way to do it. Oh, still on Killing Eve. Scott asks, I assume Scott might know you by the sounds of this. Tim, I hear you have some great footage from Killing Eve of the first AD on your iPhone.
No,
I don't know. Maybe we'll talk about that one off air, maybe.
I'll pass on that one.
I think that's possibly the right thing. A lot of love for The Last Kingdom as well. What was the biggest challenge you faced on set? And that's from Callum.
Okay, on The Last Kingdom. Okay, well, that's a... let me have a think. Well, apart from what I discussed earlier about, big mob-handed scenes, I think, well, interestingly, that opening battle scene in episode 1, we didn't have any, it was really well organized and we shot it very easily, but the biggest challenge was the tide, because we're at Bamber, and the tide comes in very quickly. It's near Holy Island. You know how the tides work at Holy Island. So we had a very, very small window of time to shoot. And the opening, if you remember the very opening shot of the series, where the camera starts in the water and it pans across the corpses of dead Scottish soldiers, and there's blood in the water, and then it pans across to the beach and you see the battle raging. That was, I think, one of the most challenging shots to do, because it was we had to choreograph the water, getting the camera in the water. We had to choreograph the body in the water. We had to choreograph the blood flowing off the body in the water, and then the battle happening, the right bit of the battle happening at the right time when the camera reaches that. And the tide was coming in really quickly. So if the props person said, oh, the blood's not quite right, we got to do it, it was already too late. So then you had to move the body in a little bit and start again, and then the camera. So that was it was a very hectic shot, that, and it was very nerve-wracking because there was so much to get right and do that within the remit of the very, very fast moving tide. So I would say, look at the opening shot of series 1, opening shot of episode 1 of the last series, and then you can take.
Okay, we're going to send everyone to Netflix for the evening now to check that out. I think that's going to be quite a good. You got the inside scoop on that one.
I think we only did 4 takes of it, and they actually, the take that we used, which was by far the best take, the director was absolutely furious because when we panned around onto the actual battle, about half the extras were just standing around doing nothing at all. They didn't know that we were turning over, and no one had called action to the background, so they were just standing around doing that. So he just cut his losses because everything else worked fine, and they were all painted out, and the CGI'd a few fighting miniature people in the background to take their place.
Oh, the magic of television, as they say. Right then, Tim, we've got a few more questions. Is there a particular film or other cinematographer that's inspired you?
Oh, gosh. Well, yes. If I was on a desert island and I could only take the work of one director and cinematographer with me, it would be Stanley Kubrick and John Alcott. So Clockwork Orange and Barry Lyndon. Those 2 movies would keep me going for the rest of my life. And they offered to me everything visually that I could ever hope to get out of any film, and a little bit of 2001 because John Alcott had to take over from Jeffrey Unsworth on 2001. So Barry Lyndon is incredible. It's an absolutely astonishing film, and I'll love that movie forever. I've probably seen it about 30 times.
See, the nice thing with these interviews, Tim, is that people often hear films they've never heard of, so now have to go watch them as well.
Well, I recommend it. Any cinematographer has got to watch Barry Lyndon, but to understand the versatility of a director and a director of photography, watch Barry Lyndon alongside Clockwork Orange, because it's the same team, same director, DP, who made it, and you can't conceive of 2 films that are more polar opposite each other visually.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think people are going out. That's just giving people things to do tonight. It's great. So they're going to go and watch these things on multiple devices. Okay. So do you think there's going to be more opportunities or less opportunities for people to swap between film and television with sort of the growth of high-end TV?
Well, I think that's already happened. It's very homogenous now. You have movie directors directing TV, Netflix series, and television directors of photography shooting movies. It's completely homogenized now. I mean, perhaps just at the very, very highest echelon of the $500 million blockbuster movies, there's a sort of core of teams who shoot those films that will probably always stay in that world, not because they would turn their nose up at television or the money's not good enough, because the money is probably better now in TV than it ever has been, and better than a lot of movies. But just when you're on a long movie, you're engaged in it for, especially if it's a big special effects film, you can be working on it for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and it just puts you out of the picture for television work, which has a much faster turnover, where you have to be available 2, 3, 4, 5 times a year to be able to keep getting those jobs. And if you're not available and you're not available by the time someone's asked you the 3rd time and you're still not available, then that's it. You're not going to be asked back. you're not going to be asked again. So
makes sense. And I think that's kind of relevant for the next question is people asking about how they can come up the ladder, really, I guess, to become a DOP or a head of department in some way, how they can sort of make that transition from runner to the next stage.
well, learn, film schools are amazing. And, I owe my career to being at the National Film School, but the proviso is that I wouldn't have got a place at the National Film School, and B, I wouldn't have been able to get what I'd got out of it if I hadn't spent a substantial amount of time on the floor in a camera crew, as a loader, as an assistant, as a focus puller, and a little bit of a camera operator. You've got to do that time. You just have to do that time learning the hard way. And when I say the hard way, it's the most enjoyable way, because you have to know how to understand just the simple politics of the way a film set works. And you have to be around a lot of people in stressful situations and understand. And you learn by osmosis how people solve problems, and you can't do that at film school, and you can't do that on your own. You can only do that when you're working for other people who have much bigger problems than your own, and you can see how they work them out, so that when it comes to you being in that similar situation, you can draw on that experience. Because filmmaking essentially it's more than problem solving. It's sort of damage limitation, because everything, at the moment you step on set, everything is conspiring against you to make it not work or to give you problems. So you have to know how to solve those problems, extricate yourself, and make sure that there is no damage.
No, that makes sense. I think there's so much happening, or hopefully going to be happening when we come out of this this
so
lockdown.
By all means, don't just go to film school, but don't go to film school straight from school or college. Do 3 or 4 years as if you want to be a director of photography, get a job as, try and get on a skill set scheme as a camera trainee, and work your way up and become a clapper loader, and, get onto bigger second units as a loader and maybe a focus puller, and then start thinking about film school. You'll be in a much better place.
Interesting. I think there's a lot out there, both across the world now. So it's time for a couple more quick ones then, Tim. We need to talk about the big C word. Is it affecting productions you're working on in the near future?
Totally. I mean, in every way. I mean, I was shooting the new series of Line of Duty, and we were 4 weeks into a 16-week shoot when we were shut down, and all sent home, and there's no word on if and when it's going to restart, and there's no people are talking about shooting things, but nobody's doing anything at the moment, and we're all in just sort of a holding pattern. I mean, I am actually on a job at the moment. I'm in Iceland filming a factual drama piece about salmon fishing. But the only way we could do that was by we had to be quarantined here and be tested, and we all tested negative. We got the results yesterday, so we still have to stay in quarantine for a few more days, and then we're allowed out to start filming. And then we'll film, but I'm going to have to go into quarantine for 2 weeks when I get back to the UK. But I'm in a beautiful place, and the scenery is spectacular, and it's wonderful company, and it's worth it.
Well, that's, I think, the important thing is the opportunity that filming often gives you.
Yeah.
To make it differently. Right.
But I don't have an answer. I mean, there's a lot of talk about guidelines and what are the guidelines under which safe filming you can proceed. And I think there's a sort of it's a double-edged sword, because yes, a lot of productions will go back, but I think there's also a lot of productions that will feel too compromised creatively by the guidelines under which they will have to function. And even if they're technically legally allowed to film they may decide that's just not worth their while because they're not going to get the product that they're not going to get the product out of it that was the intention of the original commission. So there's that kind of parallel strata of productions that may just hold off or restart completely with a whole new script next year.
I think
anybody's
it's
guess.
kind of it's exciting possibilities really out there for everything.
I mean, when it does all, touch wood, when it does all come back, there's going to be a veritable explosion of production, and it's going to go the other way, and that'll create a whole raft of problems because there won't be enough crew and there won't be enough equipment. Simple as that. And how are all these things going to be made? I don't quite have an answer yet, but we manage somehow. And I think my feeling is that we'll all end up having to do a lot more with a lot less. So potentially smaller crews, so that the personnel can spread more, and less equipment. So again, so that equipment can be shared around more productions, which suits me. It goes back to the days of going out there with a SR16 and a one zoom lens in my pocket and making a film. Fun.
See, it's possible even with the smallest kit, really.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
Tim, that's all we've got time for.
Oh, thank you very much.
I know it just whizzes past, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Being the first international interview. And thank you everyone for watching. We do hope you've enjoyed. There's been lots of nice comments and great questions from everyone as well. I just need to say before we go, next week we have 2 interviews. One on Wednesday with Susie Davis, who's a production designer and has worked on such films as Peterloo, Mr. Turner, Swallows and Amazons, and many more. And then on Thursday evening, these are both at 6 o'clock, we're joined by Tom Axon, I forgot what it's called. What you are now, Tom? A marine coordinator and production stills photographer who's worked on such shows Game of Thrones, Outlander, and the well-known Cornish film Bait. So hopefully you can all come back and join us then. We're going to let Tim go in a moment. But before you do, I have to do this again. Right, we do this. We click here. We click here. We click there. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Tim. And we shall see you all again soon. Now, Tim, we have to stay here for a second because it's 10 seconds behind us.
Okay.